Hello and welcome to episode 204 of the Book Binge, where we're reviewing a book that I actually intended to review originally several months ago, and then certain aspects of the video schedule caused it to be pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, and then I kind of forgot about it for a little bit of time, and now I'm finally covering it. That is my review of The Terminal Man by Michael Crichton, the second book that he published under his own name, and the second book in this collection. It's been 2 years now since I've covered a Crichton novel, and this is only my second one on the channel at this point. It has been far too long, and I'm almost ashamed of it. So it's been kind of a long time coming that it's actually been well over 2 years at this point, because these notes that I wrote were for several months ago. So that's definitely how long it has been. Like I said, it's been a long time coming, so let's cover The Terminal Man. Going into this one, I had no idea what it was about, but it was intriguing stuff. So let's start off with what I thought was good about The Terminal Man. The first thing I got to talk about is the character bases. Exploring the plot with a few different characters at different points of the novel overall really worked for it, I would say. These characters aren't necessarily the deepest, but they are deep enough for what Crichton's doing with it. This is something that I think I noted, or at least something that I remember at this point now, about the Andromeda strain of characters not necessarily being the most complex or memorable people in the world, but being just enough to do what the plot needs them to do, and without it feeling ham-fisted or anything being deus ex machina or whatever have you. Certain aspects of some of the characters in The Terminal Man could have been explored a little bit deeper, that's for sure, but it is enough for what the novel is, and I think that's something that Crichton in general is pretty good at doing, just making it enough for what he needs. But one of the main things I gotta praise The Terminal Man for is the sort of quasi-mystery element that's going on here, taking each piece of plot momentum in an interesting direction and causing the reader's brain to actually wonder about what's going on and think and wonder about the little details of it, following along the characters as they themselves are trying to learn more about the titular Terminal Man. Although some of these aspects are a little bit underdeveloped in certain portions of the novel, the exhaustion associated with the searchings that the characters go on kind of relates itself onto the reader, projects itself onto the reader, so that you're just like, oh man, I'm feeling tired with these characters, which is a really weird form of immersion, and almost something that's weird to claim. It's just like, oh, you're tired reading the book when it's supposed to be like a techno thriller. It's like, yeah, but at the same time, you kind of empathize with the characters in a more real way than I think I personally expected, which I thought was great. And every time the characters learned something new, the revelations of what was going on every time felt impactful, and that really helped to carry the story forward. Additionally, there being a pretty human element underpinning the plot, with the sympathy and empathy characteristics of characters, the cruelty and disregard of it in certain other ways, with the titular character, the way that all of this kind of balances out and kind of moves and threads between different angles, and the way different characters, some of the handful of POV characters, view some of those things is really interesting and great. It's all explored to different degrees in the eyes of the different doctors, and I really appreciated that. The technological ideas in the book are also pretty good, in my opinion. The neurotechnology in general involved just seems to be pretty advanced and is also super believable and really great. The electrodes and stimuli directly on the brain, and the explanations of some of these things, the scientific explanations of stuff, is something that Crichton is good at in general, but this novel, it really stands out. It's one of the standout features of it. The idea of automated computer sequencing for some of these technological ideas is really interesting. Some of it feels almost unbelievable to the time. Like, this seems pretty advanced for the time of it, which maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I obviously am not old enough to tell you for sure one way or the other, but it feels very authentic, even looking at it as a book that's several decades old at this point. I feel like it's done quite well. Several decades old, is that accurate? When was the Terminal Man even written? Let me double check that so I'm not making a fool of myself. Yeah, several decades old. This thing's 52 years old, the Terminal Man is, and it still feels kind of authentic despite being able to look back at it with the level of technology that we have now, where you're able to watch me and I'm able to record all this from one simple computer, where this kind of thing would probably not be super imaginable back in the day. Additionally, the Terminal Man has some pretty surprisingly good thematic exploration in it. The ideas associated with our overdependence on computers as people, which is ironic coming from me, I'm sure. The mingling of man and machine is a really great idea, thoroughly explored in this book, that I think is super effective, especially the more often it is covered now. It's kind of a played out idea. Crichton managed to make it really interesting and kind of his own, really was able to explore it in his own way, even despite it being so early. It doesn't feel like necessarily an early predecessor of that thematic idea, that argument associated with that. Done very well, in my opinion. There's also the psychiatric importance of test subjects being fit for certain new technological developments, studies being done on people, and how that affects them. Some of the ideas around the scientific community as a whole. I think all of these thematic ideas are explored to quite a good and interesting and really effective degree in The Terminal Man. And I appreciated Crichton for being able to do all of that in what was essentially such a short novel. I think it was only like 200 pages or so out of this collection, which ironically actually leads me to the bad of The Terminal Man. Not everything was my favorite in the world. In fact, one of my chief complaints with it is just the fact that it's a little bit too short overall, and there's too many time gaps. It follows a pretty short period of time, but there are too many of those moments where it's just like, okay, several hours have passed, where information could have been relayed, or certain other scenes could have happened to give reader more information, more context, or helped us to learn more about something associated with the plot that just weren't written in there, that I think are missing. There are scenes that feel like they're missing as a result of that. There's more story and character expansion that could have made things hit harder a little bit more emotionally, specifically with the female doctor's POV. I believe there's only one female POV in the book. And if that's the case, and her POV especially was one that I felt like this was the case. It also would have allowed for even deeper exploration of some of the themes, which were already good but could have been even better. There was a great foundation to them. I feel like they could have been a little bit more impactful if there was a little bit more page time here. And on a sort of related note, I feel like there were just a handful too many pages added, like mini scenes, basically meant to expand certain characters, to make certain characters feel like different people, that didn't actually really do that much for those characters, that didn't end up being important in any way, shape, or form, that could have been considered some form of minor bloat. Like that page time, as well as a few extra pages, could have been given to deeper character internal exploration, or could have been used in some ways that would have made certain things hit harder or been more impactful, like I was saying in the last point. Or if not replaced, they could have been expanded on in other parts with a little bit more information in other areas to make them more important, to make them actually a little bit more impactful as well. The same way the plot could have been, incorporating more of these things in the thought processes of the characters could have allowed them to feel a little bit more human. Just little tiny nitpicky type of stuff for the most part. Finally, again, similarly, certain things are also brought up about characters that could have been mentioned to some degree earlier in the book. There are times where you get little bits of character information that's just like, this could have been foreshadowed earlier and it would have made this scene more effective, type of thing. So there's just a lot of, like I said, little nitpicky type of moments like this in the book, which don't ruin it to any degree, don't necessarily make it bad, but which definitely lets you know that Crichton wasn't quite on a roll quite yet with the Terminal Man. I also didn't particularly love the ending personally. I would have preferred a little bit more resolution for all of the characters. Another side effect of the short page time. I think Dr. Ross, the arguable main character of the book especially, should have gotten a lot more treatment in this regard, but I think a lot of the other doctors could have used a little bit more of it too. There's just basically the thesis of The Bad of the Terminal Man is that it's just a little bit too short. There's plenty of stuff that feels a little bit lacking, where it's good, but it could have been really great with just a little bit of extra pages, extra screen time, etc. As for The Ugly, well, this is going to be a little bit more personal. This is still something that I remember to this day. I had the weirdest bout of deja vu while reading this book in my life. It's this funny story also involves reading Infinite Jest of all books. I read this while I was currently reading Infinite Jest. Don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything for Infinite Jest in this review. The element that kind of caused the deja vu is tangential at best over there, and only minor, very minor conceptual spoilers for this one is going to be involved. So if you want to skip it, you can skip directly to the recommendation, but either way, let's just say that the neurotechnology, including applying electrodes that can be automatically or manually activated, was an idea that appeared as one of the main things in The Terminal Man, but also was a sort of like part of one specific section of Infinite Jest. One such mentioned use in what IJ calls the P terminal, a spot of the brain of excessive pleasure when electricity can stimulate it. Infinite Jest contains a brief segment on this, on studies related to different animals' behaviors when given the ability to manually activate these electrodes in these specific spots. It was a cool section, but not necessarily exactly super memorable or relevant to the book itself, as plenty of Infinite Jest can be considered to be not very relevant to itself at times. But The Terminal Man also discusses the exact same things, down to the list of animals being the same studies with a prospective volunteer. These things are mentioned to somebody mentioned in the book. The hedonistic volunteer in this book desperately wants to have the ability to do this to himself. So this is an idea that happened in both of the books. It was whiplash for me to read that in this book because I started The Terminal Man with no knowledge of the neurotechnology subject matter at all. And I read this section, I think 1 day, maybe 2 days, but I think it was just 1 day after having read the spot in Infinite Jest that related to this, which is really crazy timing wise, as Infinite Jest is so massive. Like, it's just hilarious that this managed to happen. The coincidence was just too much for me. The ugly of The Terminal Man is that I had the craziest deja vu in my life. I couldn't even tell for certain if I had read that in Infinite Jest or if I was just imagining it after reading it in here. I had somebody confirm with the ebook of Infinite Jest at the time to search for dolphin in Infinite Jest, because I remembered that animal specifically being part of the list of animals. So it turned out I wasn't going crazy. It is, in fact, in both of these books. It was just, I felt like I was going insane for a bit. But let's move on to the recommendation, where I'm going to say, yeah, I recommend The Terminal Man. I don't think it's quite as solid as The Andromeda Strain, all things considered, but The Terminal Man is good, despite it seeming a little bit too short and there being a lot of nitpicky moments where I'm like, there could have been a little bit more here or more done with this or whatever. The stuff that is in here is good and interesting. And as long as you enjoy that kind of subject matter, the techno-thriller aspect of this neurotechnology idea, it's actually done very well and very effectively throughout the course of the novel, in my opinion. So when push comes to shove, I do recommend The Terminal Man. Not my favorite book in the world, but I did enjoy it well enough, and I think that you will too. So that is my recommendation. Thank you for watching this review, and I thank you for watching if you did. I'll be back in the next video, and I just hope to see you there.